Good evening to all of you, and it is my great pleasure to welcome the 160 members of this wonderful conference. You are very welcome. We are being hosted in Lisbon, Portugal. We have two wonderful Portuguese friends in the room. I can see obviously Mario, Constantio. We're delighted to have you, Vitor. It's lovely that you could make it, and I'm sure that there are others from Portugal. Good evening to all of you, and it is my great pleasure to welcome the 160 members of this wonderful conference. You are very welcome. We are being hosted in Lisbon, Portugal. We have two wonderful Portuguese friends in the room. I can see obviously Mario, Constantio. We're delighted to have you, Vitor. It's lovely that you could make it, and I'm sure that there are others from Portugal who are also going to help us understand the beauty of this city. So, welcome to all of you. Make sure that in the next 2 days, as I said at my press conference together with Philip Lane at lunch, make sure that you drink a lot of water, hydrate yourself. We don't want the medical center to be busy with people who do not feel well, and we'll go through it. We go through everything anyway. So I'm going to now move in my speech mode, and I apologize for the spouses who have been grateful enough to join their spouse, but who are not necessarily interested in monetary policy, and I'm afraid that this might be a bit about monetary policy. But I will start with somebody who is known by all of you, including the non-monetary policy expert. And I'm going to quote Nietzsche. Nietzsche observed, "It is our future that lays down the law of our today." When we last reviewed our strategy 4 years ago, our thinking was shaped quite naturally by the recent past. A decade of too low inflation compounded by the pandemic. But as Nietzsche warned, there is a danger in letting the past dominate our thinking. Sometimes it is actually the future, still dimly understood, that is already shaping our present. And soon after that review, guess what? The world changed in ways that we had not foreseen. The reopening of our economies after the pandemic brought about major sectoral changes. Russia's unjustifiable and horrible invasion of Ukraine triggered a fundamental shift in energy markets. The geopolitical landscape was upended, reshaping global trade. And structural changes in labor markets became increasingly apparent, driven by demographics, technological transformation, and evolving workers' preference. So given all these developments, the fundamentals of our strategy have held up well, as they should, because a sound strategy should be robust to a changing environment. Our symmetric 2% inflation target has proven effective in anchoring expectation, even though we faced some of the most severe and persistent shocks in recent economic history. And our medium-term orientation has provided essential flexibility to absorb an extremely large shock, helping to reduce the overall cost of disinflation to the economy, while still enabling a timely return of inflation to target. As a result, we saw no need to revisit the key pillars of our strategy, which is why we refer to the exercise that we have just concluded as a strategy assessment rather than a full review. And the central theme of our work has been to update the framework so that monetary policy can continue to deliver price stability in the face of the new types of shocks that we are confronting. And this evening, without downplaying the other lessons we learned, I would like to highlight 3 key conclusions that have emerged from this work that we have done. And I would like to salute those who have actually conducted this work. Governing Council members have played a key role, but those who actually carried the water are sitting in this room. They will instantly understood that they are recognized. I'm here thinking about Christophe, I'm thinking about Christiane, and I'm thinking about the whole team of more than 400 economists from all over the Euro system who actually worked on this exercise. So thank you very much to all of them. If they sit at your table, they should identify themselves. So these three conclusions concern the nature of the new environment, first of all, how we assess the risk, second, and how we have adjusted our reaction function to safeguard price stability in this new world. If by now you don't know how to spell uncertainty, you need to have your head examined, okay? So, this is what has dominated the public debate in recent weeks. And this is one of the first key conclusions from our strategy assessment. The world ahead is more uncertain, and that uncertainty is likely to make inflation more volatile. It's pretty basic, but that's the reality we face. First, we see clear signs that supply shocks are becoming more frequent. Model-based analysis by ECB staff shows that during the recent inflation surge, such shocks played a much greater role in driving inflation than they had over the previous 2 decades. And even today, supply-side forces continue to generate inflation risks in both directions. Second, we see mounting evidence that more regular supply disruptions are leading firms to adjust prices more frequently, contributing to greater inflation volatility. And this is not simply an extrapolation from the most recent shock. Rather, it reflects a structural shift in how firms operate under conditions of permanent higher uncertainty. Our research shows that in such an environment, firms tend to react more quickly to shocks, especially supply ones, in order to protect against potential future losses. At the same time, they're more likely to adopt more flexible pricing strategies, which means prices may respond not just to major shocks, but also to smaller frictions and local disruptions. Third, if inflation becomes more volatile, we could see non-linearities on both sides. In our last strategy review back in 2021, we rightly focused on the non-linear dynamics that emerge in a prolonged environment of too low inflation, where interest rates are eventually pushed to their effective lower bound. That constraint can in turn feed into inflation expectations and risk, creating a self-fulfilling low inflation trap. And of course, we remain alert to the possibility of renewed downside inflation shocks. But recent experience has also revealed non-linearities on the upside. Since firms are generally quicker to raise prices than to lower them, more frequent price adjustments mean inflation can rise quickly in response to large upside shocks. And if wages then adjust only gradually to these price increases, as we saw in recent years, inflation may remain above target for longer as wage growth slowly catches up. And this in turn can raise the risk of inflation expectations de-anchoring to the upside. So the next question that follows from this assessment is, if the economic environment becomes more volatile, how can we make our economic assessment more robust? Large shocks can trigger feedback loops and nonlinear effects that inherently give rise to a broader range of possible outcomes. In a world of higher uncertainty, it is all the more important to augment the baseline with alternative risk scenarios, to augment the baseline. Not to compete with the baseline, to augment it. And this is why the second conclusion of our assessment is the need for monetary policy to take into account risks and uncertainty using a systematic but context-specific approach. Systematic but context-specific. The ECB has used both scenario and sensitivity analysis for many years, deploying internal scenarios since the global financial crisis and publishing them for the first time during the pandemic. But our experience in the recent years has underscored the particular strength of scenario analysis in times of elevated uncertainty. Let me give you an example. Russia's unjustifiable invasion of Ukraine and the resulting energy price shock. In that case, scenarios provided insights that neither our baseline projections nor standard sensitivity analysis around the baseline could fully capture. For instance, in March 22, the invasion of Ukraine was February 22. In March 22, just a few weeks after, our baseline projected inflation at around 5% for that year, based on market-implied energy future. The sensitivity analysis suggested a slightly higher figure of about 5.5%. In contrast, the Ukraine war scenario already pointed to inflation exceeding 7%, close to the final annual figure of over 8%. At the same time, there were moments when, in hindsight, publishing scenarios could have supported both our policymaking and our communication. One example was the high uncertainty in 2021 about the speed of vaccine rollout and the nature of post-pandemic reopening, including the sectoral shift in supply and demand across goods and services sectors, both in the euro area and globally. Scenario analysis could have helped in illustrating that the range of possible inflation outcomes was unusually wide and would have reduced the risk of projecting false certainty to the public. And this is why our updated strategy commits to ensuring that our policy decisions account not only for the most likely path of inflation and the economy, but also for the surrounding risks and uncertainty, including through the appropriate use of scenario and sensitivity analysis. Very much an exercise of humility. So, my third and last part. What should our reaction function be if we know that the road ahead is likely to be more uncertain? In our last strategy review in 21, we explicitly acknowledged the risks posed by the effective lower bound. Our strategy statement called for, I quote, open quote, especially forceful or persistent, end quote. Especially forceful or persistent action when policy rates are close to the lower bound. This asymmetric focus was grounded in the asymmetry of policy space and the downward inflation bias it can produce. The lower bound continues to constrain monetary policy in the face of large disinflationary shocks. But the recent inflation surge has revealed upside non-linearities, and with them the need for a two-sided reaction function, both in terms of forcefulness or persistence. And this is the third key conclusion of our strategy assessment. This is not about reacting to small or temporary deviations, no, but about a symmetric commitment to respond to inflation dynamics that could de-anchor inflation expectations in either directions. When disinflationary shocks risk pushing policy rates towards the lower bound, acting forcefully early on helps minimize the time spent near that constraint. But likewise, when inflation overshoots, raise the risk of a feedback loop between frequent price adjustments and staggered wage responses, forceful tightening at the outset is key to anchoring expectations. So we began our recent policy cycle with historically large rate hikes delivered at an unprecedented pace. Our analysis shows that had we not acted, the probability of inflation expectations de-anchoring would have exceeded 30% in 22 and 30% in 23. At the same time, this policy cycle also offered new perspectives on optimal policy path. One insight from our last strategy review was that when rates are near the lower bound, persistence can substitute for forcefulness, helping to deliver the necessary policy stance with fewer side effects. Until recently, however, this concept had not been widely applied to tightening cycles. Typically, forceful tightening follows an inverted V-shape, with rapid rate increases followed by relatively swift cuts. But as rates move deeper into restrictive territory, the costs and side effects of further tightening also grow. At that point, it can become optimal to shift the focus from forcefulness to persistence, even if in principle there is no upper bound constraining policy space. Model simulations support this insight. Forcefulness and persistence can act as substitutes, both capable of delivering the necessary disinflation. But persistence, in particular, can help limit the economic and financial stability costs compared with continued rate increases. This was born out of our own experience. When we entered what I described as the holding phase, we placed greater weight on the persistence dimension, and this allowed the disinflation process to advance at a steady pace, while with the so-called sacrifice ratio remained historically low compared with previous disinflation episodes. Reflecting on this experience, the Governing Council considers that the reaction function is best described as requiring, I quote and I open quote, appropriately forceful or persistent monetary policy action in response to large, sustained deviation of inflation from the target in either direction. End of quote. To this end, all our instruments remain available in our toolkit, but the word appropriately is important, as it underscores that the choice of instruments and the intensity with which we use them must reflect proportionality. So, our strategy assessment has been an exercise in evolution, not revolution, and in fact, many of its conclusions are already reflected in our current policy conduct. We responded to the recent inflation shock with initially forceful and then persistent action, aiming to steer inflation back to target as swiftly as necessary, but as painlessly as possible. And scenario analysis is helping us to better understand the range of risks ahead and how to best respond to them. For example, our scenarios on potential US import tariffs have helped us navigate an uncertain global trade landscape, while also enabling us to communicate more clearly the two-sided risks shaping our current monetary policy stance. At our last monetary policy press conference in June, I described our monetary policy stance as being in a good place. I know we're not the only one in a good place. Following the conclusion of this strategy assessment, I would add that our monetary policy strategy is also in a good place, informed and strengthened by experience, and better equipped for the challenges of the future. And to close the circle with Nietzsche, he who has a why to live can bear almost any how. So even as the world changes around us, we know our purpose, and we will do whatever is necessary to deliver on that purpose, ensuring price stability for the people of Europe. And I'm not going to ask for any applause at this point in time. I would like to direct our applause, our collective applause, to a few people that I'm going to mention. 3 actually tonight, and all of you could be identified, acknowledged and recognized, but I'm going to mention 3 of them, and you will understand why. 1, because he identifies, epitomizes the standard of a courageous central banker, and he deserves those applause. Wait, hold it. So you all have 30 seconds to think who it is.
1 second is enough.
Second person is the one who was together with me at the press conference today and who has led the exercise of the strategy review in 21, who's led the exercise of the strategy assessment in 25, and who will tell you that he had nothing to do with it because he had such competent people to work with. But it is not true. It's just a reflection of his modesty, and you would know who that person is. He sits with us on the executive board of the ECB. And the third one is the most veteran central banker in the room. He has been with us 14 years. Now, anybody who has been a central banker 14 years and is still alive today, please stand up. None. So that's him. And I would like to ask you to share your applause with Jay Powell, Philip Lane, and Klaas Knot.